Welcome to our channel. Here, we delve into the past so you can drift off to sleep easily and peacefully. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button right away, because by the end of this talk, you'll likely be fast asleep. Close your eyes. Our story is already unfolding. Amidst the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean lies an island that has captivated the minds of researchers, historians, and travelers from around the globe for centuries. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, as its indigenous inhabitants called it, seems as though nature itself concealed it, placing it at the very edge of the known world. Just imagine, the nearest speck of land, tiny Pitcairn Island, lies 2,000 kilometers, about 1,040 miles to the west, while the nearest continent, the coast of Chile, is separated from Rapa Nui by nearly 3,500 kilometers, about 2,175 miles of boundless, vast ocean. These numbers aren't just distances. They embody mystery and challenge. How, against all odds of nature and logic, could such a unique civilization emerge and flourish on such an isolated piece of land, leaving behind its astounding legacy? The island itself is small, spanning about 163 square kilometers, 63 square miles, smaller than many major cities we know. Yet, on this small patch of land, events unfolded that shaped not only the fate of its inhabitants, but also our understanding of ancient cultures, prompting us to ponder fundamental questions about our past. Where do civilizations originate? What drives their rise? And what mysterious forces lead to their decline and disappearance? But before we delve into the mysteries of the statues, known locally as Moai, we need to understand how this island, lost in the middle of the ocean, got its current name. It happened in 1722, on the Sunday morning of April 5th. Ships captained by the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen approached its shores. The island, absent from all known maps at the time, was an unexpected discovery for the expedition. The crew was astounded by the sight of enormous stone statues lined up along the coast, their gazes turned inland. But just as striking was the fact that the island was discovered on Easter Sunday. Deciding to mark this coincidence, Captain Jacob Roggeveen, without much hesitation, named the land Easter Island. Little did he know then that this incidental and essentially superficial name would become firmly fixed in the world's geographical atlases. Although the islanders themselves and their distant ancestors called their home something different, Rapa Nui, which translates to Great Rapa, or sometimes Big Island. Thus, chance became part of history. But behind this accidental name lies a much deeper, more ancient, and enigmatic story, which we will begin to unravel today. We embark on a narrative about a people who conquered the ocean expanses, about a civilization that seemingly arose against nature itself, and about the mysterious stone giants who, even today, centuries later, keep their silent secrets. It's time to journey to the very edge of the earth, and time to uncover the story of an island that has itself become a legend. When Europeans first landed on Easter Island, they were struck not only by the grandeur of the stone statues, but also by the incredible fact that human life existed here at all. After all, the island was so remote that imagining people capable of crossing these vast waters in simple wooden canoes seemed almost impossible. In an era when Europe was just beginning to dream of distant sea voyages, Polynesians were already masterfully navigating thousands of kilometers without maps, compasses, or any written navigational aids. Their only guides were the stars, winds, ocean currents, and a profound understanding of the ocean's nature, passed down orally through generations. The question that puzzled scientists for centuries was, where exactly did these pioneers of the Pacific come from? Thanks to years of research comparing archaeological, anthropological, and genetic data, we have an answer. Today, most experts believe the first settlers reached its shores sometime between 700 and 1200 AD. Most likely, their starting point was the Marquesas Islands, located approximately 3,500 kilometers, about 2,175 miles northwest of Rapa Nui. It was from there, driven perhaps by necessity or the spirit of exploration, that they embarked on a boundless voyage in search of new lands. Why did the Polynesians undertake such a perilous expedition? Scientists propose several theories. First, migration due to overpopulation and resource scarcity on their home islands. Second, intertribal conflicts forcing one group to flee and seek refuge. The third hypothesis suggests deliberate exploration in the spirit of ancient great navigators, seeking to expand the known world and find new lands to establish a new culture. Modern anthropological and especially genetic studies reveal an unexpected and astonishing chapter in Rapa Nui's history, namely, a mysterious connection between the islanders and the peoples of South America. In the mid-20th century, the renowned Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl proposed a hypothesis that caused quite a stir in the scientific community. He suggested that the first inhabitants of Easter Island might have sailed not from Polynesia, but from South America. To support his idea, he undertook the famous voyage on the raft Kon-Tiki, built from balsa logs modeled after the ancient watercraft of South American indigenous peoples. Although Heyerdahl successfully crossed the Pacific from the coast of Peru to Polynesia, most anthropologists and archaeologists initially treated his theory with skepticism. However, subsequent research and discoveries have shown that contacts between Easter Island and South America might have been deeper and more complex than previously thought. The most compelling evidence supporting a connection with South America comes from genetic studies conducted in the 21st century. To the surprise of scientists, traces of South American ancestry were found in the genome of Rapa Nui inhabitants. Furthermore, the data indicates that contact between Polynesians and South Americans occurred long before Europeans arrived in the Pacific, possibly between the 14th and 16th centuries. This suggests that ancient Polynesians not only mastered ocean navigation, but perhaps also made long voyages in both directions, actively interacting with peoples from another continent. Archaeological finds on the island also point to a connection with South America. Specifically, the sweet potato was found on Rapa Nui, a crop of South American origin not found wild in Polynesia. Conversely, chicken bones, the primary domestic fowl in Polynesia, have been found on the American continent, posing a significant question for researchers. Who first crossed the vast Pacific Ocean, and how many times was this journey made in both directions? Perhaps the most striking and mysterious evidence, however, remains the art of the ancient Rapa Nui people. It shows surprising similarities in motifs with the art of pre-Columbian civilizations in South America. Particularly noteworthy is a statue of a seated figure in a pose typical of ancient Andean cultures. Similar sculptures found both on Easter Island and the mainland prompt speculation about possible cultural contacts, exchange of ideas, myths, and even religious beliefs between seemingly isolated peoples. Currently, the question of interaction between Easter Island and South America remains open and debated, Most contemporary scientists agree that Rapa Nui civilization developed primarily from a Polynesian base. It's possible that transoceanic voyages were sporadic, risky, and rare, but they nevertheless left their mark on the islanders' genes and culture. However, the inhabitants of Easter Island themselves had their own, equally fascinating version of how they came to this land. According to legend, the story of Rapa Nui begins in the distant mythical land of Hiva, supposedly located somewhere in Polynesia. Hiva was a fertile, flourishing land where people lived in abundance. However, times of strife, enmity, and destructive wars arrived. Chief Hotu Matuʻa, ruler of one of the tribes, had a prophetic dream in which a sage pointed him to an island amidst the great ocean, destined to be the salvation for his people. Hotu Matuʻa believed the vision. He gathered his most loyal followers and ordered the construction of large sea canoes capable of enduring a long ocean voyage. He decided to take his large family, as well as plants, animals, and everything necessary to start a new life. Several canoes set off, including his personal vessel filled with sacred objects and relics. The journey was incredibly difficult and long. The legend tells that the navigators guided themselves by the stars and birds soaring high in the sky, listened to the voice of the ocean, and tried to stay on course. A mythical bird, sent by the gods, helped them by showing the way to the new land. During the voyage, they endured storms, calms, and periods of terrible despair when it seemed the prophecy was false. Finally, after many days and nights, the new land seen in the prophetic dream appeared on the horizon. The bay where the canoes entered is called Anakina, a place preserved on Easter Island to this day. Here, on the white sandy beach surrounded by palm trees, Hotu Matuʻa was the first to step ashore. He landed first, becoming, according to tradition, the first person to found a settlement here and the first king of the island. The legend also tells how Hotu Matuʻa and his companions divided the island into different territories, establishing the Rapa Nui clans. Every lineage, every family on the island could subsequently trace their ancestry directly back to Hotu Matuʻa himself. Thus, this myth not only recounted one man's heroic act, but also united all the island's inhabitants, creating a sense of shared roots and common destiny. But a natural question arises. Is the legend of Hotu Matuʻa historical fact, or merely a poetic image designed to explain the people's origins? Modern historians and anthropologists believe that such legends always contain a kernel of real events, transformed and embellished with mystical details over time through repeated oral transmission. It is highly likely that Hotu Matuʻa was a real person, perhaps an authoritative chief who undertook the great journey with his tribe. The legend of the migration might have become so firmly rooted in the islanders' collective memory, precisely because it reflected genuine historical events. Today, thanks to archaeological excavations, we know that Anakina Beach was indeed one of the first settled places on the island. Traces of the earliest settlements have been found here, strikingly coinciding with the myth, confirming its possible historical basis. Of course, it's impossible to determine precisely if Hotu Matuʻa existed exactly as the legend portrays him. But one thing is clear. For the Rapa Nui people, he was not just a figure from the past. He was the symbol of the birth of their unique civilization. Over several generations, this remote island transformed into a kind of paradise where a unique civilization flourished, adapting to local conditions and developing a completely distinct way of life, even before the appearance of the famous stone giants, the Moai. The first inhabitants of Rapa Nui settled on the fertile coastal lands, especially in Anakeena Bay, surrounded by dense palm groves and offering convenient access to the ocean. It is here that archaeologists have found the oldest settlements, proving that the islanders' lives were inextricably linked to the sea and the land's resources. The Rapa Nui mastered the art of fishing and hunting seabirds, using long, sturdy canoes skillfully carved from the wood of giant palm trees. Thanks to their navigational skills and deep knowledge of the ocean, fishermen could venture far out to sea, catching fish and other seafood that formed a substantial part of their daily diet. On land, in carefully cultivated small plots, the islanders grew sweet potatoes, bananas, and sugarcane brought by their ancestors. Agricultural work was accompanied by rituals and ceremonies aimed at securing the support of fertility spirits. This reflected a deep connection with the natural world, which formed the basis of their entire social and religious life. Even before the erection of the giant statues, a tradition emerged on the island of building special stone platforms called ahu. These platforms served not only as ceremonial sites, but also as important centers of community life, places for ancestor worship and communication with their spirits. Clans and tribes gathered around the ahu for celebrations, rites, and festivals, marking significant events in the community's life. The earliest ahu were simple platforms made of stones and coral, but over time they evolved into more complex architectural structures. Rapanui ceremonies were closely intertwined with natural cycles. There were rituals associated with the rainy season, planting, harvesting, catching specific types of fish, or the migration of seabirds. These events were colorful, expressive, and accompanied by songs, dances, and even theatrical performances. Priests and elders, possessing special knowledge and authority, played crucial roles. They helped the tribe maintain harmony between people and the spirit world. The craftsmanship of Rapa Nui artisans deserves special mention. Before the Moai appeared, the islanders were skilled carvers of wood and bone from sea animals, as well as adept jewelers creating ornaments from shells, coral, and colored stones. Their creations were distinguished not only by elegance, but also by deep symbolism. Ritual adornments made of bird feathers, necklaces of shark teeth, and massive earrings of volcanic obsidian highlighted a person's status and belonging to a particular clan or tribe. However, a truly astonishing element of this culture was the creation of Rongorongo. This writing system is not just mysterious, it is unique in all of Oceania and is the only script invented by a Polynesian people before European contact. The Rongorongo script impresses with its unusual form and complexity. The glyphs are stylized representations of humans, animals, plants, as well as various natural objects and abstract symbols. It seems as if the tablets are covered in enigmatic hieroglyphs whose meaning has long been lost. The name Rongorongo itself in the Rapa Nui language literally translates as to recite or to chant, suggesting a possible ritual purpose for the texts, which might once have been performed as ancient chants. Rongorongo texts were carved onto wooden tablets using shark teeth or sharpened obsidian flakes, then stored in the dwellings of priests and chiefs. Most striking about these tablets is the way they were read. The inscriptions are written in what is known as reverse boustrophodon. Lines were written alternately right to left and left to right, and upon changing direction, the glyphs were flipped upside down. This unusual feature further complicates decipherment and poses additional questions for scholars. Only just over 20 wooden tablets with Rongorongo texts have survived to this day, scattered in museums worldwide from Europe to America and Chile. But not a single one has been fully deciphered, despite numerous attempts over the past 150 years by leading linguists, historians, and cryptographers. The script remains silent, as if challenging modern science and guarding the secrets of Easter Island. However, among all the tablets, one has a particularly mystical and dramatic story. This tablet, known as Mamari, was found by missionaries in the mid-19th century. Its original keeper was a Rapa Nui elder, one of the last bearers of the knowledge of the ancient script. Shortly after the missionaries acquired the tablet, a severe fire broke out in the house where most Rongorongo texts were stored. Almost all other ancient writings of the island perished in the flames, taking with them a unique history and ancestral knowledge. But the Mamari tablet escaped the fire. Missionaries took it first to Tahiti, then it reached Europe, eventually ending up in museum collections after an incredible journey from remote Rapa Nui to the Old World. Since then, scholars have repeatedly tried to understand its meaning, believing this particular tablet might hold the key to deciphering all other Rongorongo texts. Interest in the mysterious script of Easter Island is particularly high today, as its decipherment could open unknown pages of Rapa Nui history, shed light on the reasons for creating the stone statues, and tell much about the lives of the ancient islanders. But despite modern technology, computer analysis, and painstaking study, the texts still guard their secrets, compelling researchers to return to them again and again. Over time, the culture of Easter Island began to transform, and roughly between the 13th and 16th centuries AD, something emerged that would forever change its history and become one of antiquity's most intriguing mysteries. We are talking about the famous stone statues, the Moai. But before we delve into the meaning and purpose of these giants, we must look at their birthplace, the enigmatic volcanic quarry of Rano, Raraku. It was here, amidst ancient hills and volcanic slopes, that a true stone workshop, unparalleled in the world, spread out. The Rano Raraku Quarry is an extinct volcano that served as a kind of cradle for the Moai for several centuries. Here, Rapa Nui master carvers sculpted their stone giants. The statues are found in various stages of completion. Some are merely outlined in the rock face, others are fully finished and detached from the cliff, seemingly awaiting transport to the coast. In total, over 400 statues are counted here, each standing as a silent witness to the times when the ancient civilization still thrived on the island. How did the ancient masters create their imposing works? Work on a single statue began directly in the rock face. Using simple tools, small stone hand picks, toki, made of basalt and obsidian cutters, the ancient sculptors gradually freed the Moai figure from the volcanic tuff. Work proceeded from top to bottom. First, the head with its characteristic facial features was carved, then the torso and arms, folded across the stomach in a ritual pose, gradually emerged. This process could take more than a year, and creating the largest statues required the combined efforts of entire clans. Each Moai is unique. The statues differ in facial features, size, and the level of detail. However, among the statues created in Rano Raraku, there are special figures that still hold their secrets. Deep within the quarry lie several enormous unfinished statues, among which the largest Moai stands out, a giant nearly 21 meters, almost 70 feet, long and weighing around 200 tons. It was never fully detached from the rock and today lies like a forgotten colossus on the volcano's slope. It is around such statues that the main mysteries revolve. Why did the ancient masters, having done such colossal work, suddenly stop and leave their most impressive creations unfinished? Scientists propose several theories to explain this puzzle. Some believe the sudden cessation of work at Rano Raraku was triggered by major social conflicts or warfare that engulfed the island. Others are convinced environmental problems were to blame, such as the rapid disappearance of forests, leading to resource shortages. A third group of researchers speaks of a spiritual crisis. Perhaps the Rapa Nui people became disillusioned with their former gods and cults and abandoned their creations, deciding the statues could no longer help them combat harsh realities. Beyond scientific hypotheses and archaeological findings, the people of Easter Island have preserved their own legends in which the Moai were not just stone statues, but beings endowed with special power, mana, and living their own secret lives. Among these many tales is one astonishing story about a Moai that once came to life and became the protector of all Rapa Nui. According to this ancient legend, long before Europeans arrived, a talented and wise master carver lived on Rapa Nui. He was famous for his skill in creating Moai, and each of his statues was considered particularly beautiful and spirited. It was said the master invested not only physical labor, but also a piece of his soul into his stone giants. One day, a fierce conflict erupted on the island, threatening to destroy peaceful life and lead to complete chaos. The war intensified, and no one could stop the bloodshed. Then the islanders, having lost hope, came to the old master and begged him to appeal to the spirits of the ancestors for help. Seeing his people's suffering, the master heeded their pleas. He went to his greatest creation, a huge Moai standing on a platform by the shore, and prayed for a long time, asking the ancestral spirits to protect the island from disaster. The tribal elders merely shook their heads, disbelieving. But at dawn the next day, the incredible happened. The inhabitants saw the huge stone statue seemingly come alive. Its eyes glowed, its stone shoulders trembled, and the giant slowly descended from its platform, heading towards the warring factions. The astonished warriors, seeing the living Moai, overcome with terror and awe, laid down their weapons and ceased fighting. The stone giant walked through the battlefields and stopped at the border between the lands of the two tribes, as if warning them that any attempt to resume the conflict would mean ruin for the entire Rapa Nui people. It was said his gaze possessed such power and wisdom that no person could withstand it without feeling fear or deep remorse. After this event, peace returned to the island. The grateful inhabitants placed the statue back on its platform, and it froze again, turning back into stone, returning to its silent state. But from then on, this Moai was revered by the Rapa Nui as the protector and guardian of the island, capable of coming to life again in the direst times to defend its people. One of the most mysterious and fascinating topics related to the Moai is how the inhabitants of Easter Island moved and erected these stone giants across the island. After all, some erected moai reached incredible sizes, up to 10 or even 15 meters, 33 to 50 feet tall, and weighed several tens of tons. How could the islanders, lacking complex machinery, successfully transport such colossal statues from the Raraku Quarry and then raise them onto the stone ahu platforms along the coast? Since the island's discovery, scientists have repeatedly proposed various hypotheses to explain this puzzle. The most common and long-accepted version involved transport on wooden sledges or rollers moving over logs from palm trees. According to this hypothesis, the islanders felled trees, laid the trunks across the path, and then carefully moved the statues, lying horizontally over them. This method seemed the most plausible. However, archaeologists soon encountered a significant contradiction. The island lacks sufficient evidence of roads or the necessary amount of timber to move hundreds of such figures. Moreover, this method would have required a vast number of people and resources, which were always limited on the island. Gradually, another theory, initially seeming utterly incredible, began to gain popularity. It was based on an ancient local legend stating that the Moai walked to their destinations under the influence of magical power, mana, and the prayers of priests. Of course, taking this literally is difficult. However, some researchers speculated that the legend might conceal a real transportation technique where the statues literally walked across the land. In the early 21st century, researchers from America and Chile conducted a series of unique experiments to test this hypothesis. They made an exact replica of a moai, matching the dimensions and proportions of the originals, and using ropes and a small group of people, attempted to make it move. They tied ropes around the statue's head and shoulders and carefully rocked it side to side, essentially forcing it to step from one edge of its base to the other. And the statue did indeed walk, moving slowly as if striding, even though it weighed several tons. This experiment demonstrated that the ancient Rapa Nui could have used such a method, requiring significantly less timber and manpower than previously thought. Furthermore, it clarifies the strange shape of the bases of many statues, which have a slightly rounded bottom, ideal for this kind of walking movement. Such walking moai also explain the local legend that claimed the statues walked to their ahu themselves. Today, active debates continue among scientists about which method the ancient islanders actually used, and there is still no final consensus. Most likely, the people of Easter Island may have used various methods to transport the statues: rolling on logs, vertical walking movement, and perhaps even combined techniques, depending on the statue's size, the terrain, and the distance. When we picture the statues of Easter Island, giant stone heads towering above the ground usually come to mind. This is how the moai are most often depicted in photographs, books, and films. However, for a long time, few knew that these statues have complete torsos hidden beneath layers of soil and ash accumulated over centuries. The discovery that changed our perception of the moai happened relatively recently. For many years, it was believed they were just heads placed on the surface. However, more thorough excavations revealed that many statues extend several meters underground, and mysterious carved images and symbols are preserved on their backs. Although local inhabitants always knew about the Moai's buried parts, the first documented evidence appeared in 1914 thanks to British researcher Catherine Routledge, who noted that some statues had hidden torsos, but her work remained relatively unknown. The real sensation occurred in the early 21st century when the Easter Island Statue Project EISP team, led by Joanne Van Tilburg, began large-scale excavations. Scientists chose several partially buried statues in the Raraku Quarry, the origin of most Moai, for study. As they began excavating the soil, they discovered that the statues extended several meters deep, forming complete torsos with arms stretched along their sides. So, why were the Moai buried in the earth? Scientists have several theories. One reason is natural erosion. Easter Island is subject to wind and rain, which over centuries washed soil down the slopes, gradually covering the lower parts of the statues, especially in the Raraku Quarry. Another hypothesis relates to ritual actions. Perhaps some statues were deliberately buried by the ancient islanders, either due to a shift in religious beliefs or to protect the Moai from destruction. Finally, some statues simply sank into the ground under their own weight, or were left unfinished in the quarry, explaining why they are so deeply embedded. But the most unexpected discovery was the presence of carved patterns and symbols on the backs of some Moai. These petroglyphs contain mysterious signs that might shed light on the rituals and beliefs of the ancient Rapa Nui. One of the most common motifs includes crescent or canoe shapes, which some researchers believe could be related to ancestor worship or symbolize voyages. Images of palms and long curved lines are also found, interpreted as possibly reflecting the importance of seafaring to the Rapa Nui, or as symbolic reminders of their ancestors' great migration across the ocean. The hypothesis that some of the discovered symbols might be related to the Rongorongo writing system generates significant interest. Some archaeologists are skeptical about this theory, as Rongorongo was typically written on wooden tablets and had a linear character. However, several researchers, such as Stephen Fisher, believe that elements of this script might have existed as petroglyphs even before it was formalized into linear writing. Since the arrival of the first researchers on Easter Island, debates have persisted about the meaning the Moai held for the ancient inhabitants. These stone giants were not merely works of art or objects of worship. Their creation and placement on the island followed a clear system. Most scientists agree that the Moai were connected to ancestor worship and symbolized spiritual power, known in Polynesian culture as mana. In the beliefs of the ancient Rapa Nui, chiefs and notable individuals did not simply disappear after death. They became patrons of their descendants, and their spirits continued to influence the living, bestowing luck, protection, and fertility. However, they could also withdraw their blessing if descendants violated traditions or desecrated sacred sites. The Moai served as a link between the world of the living and the world of the ancestors. By erecting a stone statue, the Rapa Nui not only preserved the memory of prominent figures from the past, but also sought to keep their power, mana, close. Each statue likely represented a specific ancestor or chief who possessed strong mana during their lifetime. Placed on special stone platforms, ahu, they became centers for rituals and ceremonies. The taller and more massive the statue, the more powerful the clan that erected it was considered. This may have led to a kind of competition between clans, each striving to create ever more majestic Moai. Over time, their sizes increased, and the process of creation and transport became more complex. indicating the paramount importance of the statues in society. One of the most intriguing features of the Moai is their orientation. Almost all known statues face inland, not towards the ocean. If their purpose was protection from external threats, it would be logical to expect them to face the sea, like sentinels guarding the island from enemies. However, their gazes are directed towards former settlement sites and agricultural lands. This indicates their role was not to repel external dangers, but to protect and bless the island itself and its inhabitants. The Moai seem to watch over their descendants, observing their lives and safeguarding them. There is only one exception on the entire island, the Ahu Akivi platform, where 7 statues are positioned facing the ocean. This has generated numerous hypotheses. According to one local legend, they represent the 7 scouts sent by the mythical chief Hotu Matuʻa to the island before the main migration. However, modern research suggests their orientation might be linked to astronomy. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the sun sets directly opposite these Moai, possibly indicating their connection to calendrical and religious cycles. There is also evidence that Moai played a role in the power hierarchy. The more statues a clan possessed, the higher its status. Erecting them could have been a way to display the clan's power and wealth, and maintaining them was the descendants' duty. A rival could topple the Moai of an enemy clan, symbolically stripping the lineage of ancestral protection. This might be linked to the period of mass statue toppling in the island's later history. Besides their religious and social significance, Moai might also have played a role in agricultural rites. Some archaeologists note that the largest platforms with statues are located near ancient fields. This could mean the statues participated in fertility rituals, invoking ancestral spirits to bless the land and grant abundant harvests. Among the hundreds of Moai remaining on Easter Island, there is one whose fate took a completely different turn. It left its native land and ended up in distant Europe, becoming not only a museum exhibit, but also a symbol of loss, oblivion, and cultural alienation. This is Hoa Hakananai'a, one of the most enigmatic and significant stone giants of Rapa Nui. Hoa Hakananai'a, which can be translated as stolen or hidden friend, was carved from basalt and likely installed in the ceremonial village of Orongo. In 1868, the British ship HMS Topaz arrived at Easter Island. The crew, under Commander Richard Powell, impressed by the huge statues, decided to take one as a gift for Queen Victoria. The Moai was removed from its platform, loaded onto the ship with great difficulty, and embarked on a journey from which it was never destined to return. Upon arrival in Great Britain, the statue was presented to the British Museum, where it soon became a central exhibit. For Western scholars of the time, it was an archaeological sensation, an exotic artifact from a distant civilization. However, for the Rapa Nui people themselves, its loss became a symbol of the forced removal of their cultural heritage. Over time, attitudes towards this relic have changed. If in the 19th century it was viewed as a curious find, in the 21st century, Hoa Hakananai'a serves as a reminder of the colonial past and the cultural plunder of the island. For the descendants of the Rapa Nui, it remains not just a statue, but the spirit of an ancestor who was stolen and now resides in exile. In recent years, island authorities have repeatedly requested its return to its homeland. arguing that the Moai are not just archaeological objects, but living carriers of their cultural identity. The debate over the statue's return continues. The British Museum has not yet shown readiness to part with the valuable exhibit, but the global trend towards the restitution of cultural property offers hope that one day the statue may return to its native land among the descendants of those who created it. The loss of Hoa Hakananai'a became a symbol for the Rapa Nui, not only of colonial appropriation, but also of a deep rupture with their own past. However, this rupture began long before the arrival of Europeans. By the time European ships reached Easter Island, the ancient Rapa Nui civilization was already in a complex period of decline. The giant statues, which had stood on their platforms for centuries, had been toppled, ancient customs disrupted, and society itself plunged into an era of instability. For a long time, it was believed that the cause of this collapse was ecological self-destruction. According to a widely held theory, the islanders sawed off the branch they were sitting on. To transport the Moai, they ruthlessly destroyed the forests, leading to soil erosion, agricultural decline, famine, and internecine warfare. This scenario, actively promoted in the mid-20th century, portrayed Rapa Nui's fate as a cautionary tale for all humanity, an example of the disastrous consequences of unwise resource use. However, modern research indicates that the reality was much more complex, and the version of the islanders' self-destruction may not fully align with the truth. The ecological collapse hypothesis claimed that the Rapa Nui cut down all the forests for the statues, and when the trees ran out, they lost the ability to build boats, fish, and farm effectively. As a result, chaos engulfed the island, leading to wars, mass starvation, and even cannibalism. For many years, the prevailing image of Easter Island in scientific circles was that of an impoverished, lifeless place, pushed to its limits by both nature and its inhabitants. This picture relied heavily on the descriptions of the first Europeans who arrived in the 18th century. They found the island virtually treeless, with sparse vegetation and eroded slopes. However, modern archaeological research allows for a different perspective on this issue. Studies of soil layers conducted in recent decades have yielded surprising results. Paleobotanical analysis of pollen preserved in ancient sediments showed that the island was once covered in dense forests, primarily consisting of the now extinct giant palm Paschalococos disperta, as well as other trees and shrubs, indicating a much richer ecosystem than previously thought. But the key question remains: how quickly and why did these forests disappear? In recent years, a hypothesis has emerged suggesting that rats, introduced by the settlers, played a major role in the deforestation, perhaps even more so than humans. One of the most interesting discoveries in this context is the finding of palm nuts. Archaeologists found vast quantities of palm nut remains in the soil, nearly all gnawed by rat teeth. This led to the suggestion that the Polynesian rats, Rattus exulans, introduced by the settlers, consumed palm seeds, preventing the natural regeneration of the forests. To test this theory, researchers conducted a laboratory experiment recreating the conditions under which the ancient Easter Island palm seeds might have germinated. It turned out that an uncontrolled rat population could destroy nearly 100% of the palm seeds, preventing them from sprouting. This meant that even if humans were cutting down trees, natural regeneration was extremely difficult or impossible due to the destructive activity of rodents. Thus, This new perspective on Easter Island's ecological history suggests that deforestation was likely not solely the result of deliberate destruction, but rather a consequence of complex interactions between humans, plants, and introduced animals. Archaeological data indicates that even after losing their forests, the islanders were not entirely without means of subsistence. They developed sophisticated adaptation methods, including so-called lithic mulch gardens. Fields were covered with a layer of stones that helped retain soil moisture and protected sprouts from wind and erosion. This proves that the islanders understood the importance of resource conservation and took measures to sustain agriculture under changed conditions. Furthermore, there is no conclusive evidence of mass starvation or a sharp demographic decline that, according to older theories, should have followed the ecological catastrophe. On the contrary, studies suggest that even after the forests disappeared, the Rapa Nui continued their economic activities and maintained a stable social organization right up until European contact. However, at some point, their social structure did fracture, leading to one of the most dramatic episodes in the island's history, the mass toppling of the Moai. When Europeans first arrived on Rapa Nui in the 18th century, they found most of the Moai already toppled, lying face down or broken. This generated many hypotheses. Were the Moai destroyed during interclan wars? Or was their overthrow an act of spiritual rejection of old beliefs? The answer remains a subject of debate among scholars, but archaeological data helps clarify the events that led to the collapse of the ancient order. Rapa Nui was long a society built on a clan system, where power was inherited, and each lineage's status was reinforced by its Moai. The more majestic the statue, the higher the clan's prestige. However, by the time of European contact, this system had already begun to falter. Analysis of archaeological data indicates that the toppling of the Moai was not a single event, but stretched over several decades, possibly even centuries. Traces of destruction found on various Ahu platforms suggest the statues were overthrown with varying degrees of aggression. Some lie relatively intact, as if carefully lowered, while others are shattered, as if violently thrown down. This suggests the toppling could have resulted from both violent conflicts and a conscious rejection of former traditions. One possible cause could have been internal turmoil. Weakening central authority, resource scarcity, and heightened competition between clans could have led to outbreaks of violence. Whereas previously a clan's status was defined by the grandeur of its Moai, in times of crisis, destroying an opponent's statue could become a symbolic act demonstrating their defeat. Some researchers believe the Moai toppling might be linked to a spiritual restructuring of society. A gradual loss of faith in the power of ancestors and their protection could have rendered the statues obsolete or even dangerous relics of the past. During the same period, the cult of Tangata Manu, the Birdman, was gaining strength on the island, largely supplanting the previous system of ancestor veneration. Perhaps the new beliefs clashed with the old traditions, leading to the mass abandonment and destruction of the Moai. A legend persists among the Rapa Nui about a chief who first dared to topple a Moai, thereby initiating the destruction of the ancient order. This story, passed down through generations, has acquired mystical details and remains an important part of local folklore. According to tradition, the chief of an influential clan, whose name history has not preserved, concluded that the Moai had lost their ancestral power and could no longer protect his people. he made a radical decision to prove that the stone giants lacked divine power. At night, by moonlight, he and his warriors approached the platform where his lineage's ancient Moai stood. The men threw ropes secured around the statue's head and began pulling with shouts. The giant slowly tilted, then fell face down with a dull thud. The earth trembled, and a gust of wind swept over the island, like a warning from the ancestral spirits. The chief hoped destroying the statue would bring his clan greatness, but he miscalculated. Soon after, his lineage became embroiled in fierce internecine conflict, perhaps as a consequence of undermining traditional authority, or, as some believe, because the chief and his descendants were cursed by the spirits whose image he destroyed. According to the legend, all his heirs either perished in bloody clashes or were exiled, and he himself died in oblivion and solitude, forever remembered by the Rapa Nui as the man who dared to challenge the ancestors. While the legend of the chief's curse belongs to the realm of myth, the evidence of brutal conflicts accompanying the decline of the Moai cult is very real. Archaeological excavations have shown that a wave of violence swept the island during this period, confirmed by numerous finds. Stone weapons, primarily sharp obsidian spear and dart points, Matuʻa, are found throughout the territory, indicating that a society previously focused on construction and rituals had turned into an arena of struggle for survival. Furthermore, analysis of human remains found in ancient settlements reveals traces of weapon-inflicted trauma, as well as fractures characteristic of hand-to-hand combat. All this indicates that the end of the Moai era was overshadowed by a period of bloody conflict. In addition to internal conflicts and the breakdown of the traditional order, another powerful factor began to impact the fate of the Rapa Nui: contact with the outside world. For centuries, the island remained isolated, its inhabitants unaware of other people's existence. But starting in the 18th century, ships began appearing on the horizon, and each new visit by foreigners became a trial for Rapa Nui, changing the course of its history. These encounters with the outside world were far from peaceful or equitable. They brought violence, disease, slavery, and eventually the island's colonization. The first Europeans to see Easter Island were the sailors of Jacob Roggeveen's Dutch expedition, arriving in 1722. The contact itself was brief and far from friendly. The Dutch went ashore, but soon a skirmish broke out between them and the islanders, resulting in the deaths of several Rapa Nui. What exactly provoked the clash is unclear. Perhaps the islanders tried to steal something from the Europeans, or the sailors behaved unnecessarily aggressively. Whatever the case, Roggeveen soon left the island, leaving behind the first description of its inhabitants and the mysterious stone statues. Over half a century later, in 1774, the famous British captain James Cook arrived on Rapa Nui. His expedition left much more detailed records of the local life than Roggeveen's report. By that time, Rapa Nui civilization had already undergone significant changes. The Moai were toppled, clans were fragmented, and the islanders themselves, according to eyewitnesses, appeared malnourished. Cook noted that the islanders were poorly clothed, their dwellings extremely primitive, and food scarce. This description long served as confirmation of the island civilization's collapse theory. But today, researchers lean towards the view that Europeans might have encountered the Rapa Nui not in a state of complete collapse, but during a period of complex social reorganization. The real tragedy for the island's population unfolded in the 19th century when Rapa Nui became entangled in the global slave trade. In 1862, Peruvian slavers arrived at its shores. They were hunting for cheap labor for guano extraction and plantations in Peru. The Rapa Nui, unaware of the slave-owning world beyond their island, became easy victims. In a short period, about 1,500 islanders, nearly half the total population, were captured and taken to Peru, where forced labor in inhumane conditions awaited them. When international pressure forced Peruvian authorities to stop the slave trade, some Rapa Nui were sent back home. However, out of more than 1,500 abducted, only about 15 managed to return. These few survivors brought back deadly diseases, smallpox, tuberculosis, dysentery, to which the isolated island population had no immunity. The epidemics that broke out shortly after their return wiped out most of the remaining population. By the end of the 19th century, only a handful remained from the once numerous people, around 111 individuals. Some sources say about 150. Many cultural traditions were lost, the Rongorongo script forgotten, and the island itself gradually became colonial territory. In 1888, it came under Chilean control. Its indigenous inhabitants became virtual prisoners in their own land, as most of the island was leased out as a sheep farm, and the Rapa Nui themselves were turned into hired laborers, stripped of basic rights. But even in these difficult times, there were Rapa Nui who sought to preserve their culture and adapt to the new realities. Some leaders, educated or experienced outside the island, brought new knowledge that helped the people engage with the outside world and save remnants of their heritage. Thus, the influence of the outside world on the island proved ambiguous. On one hand, contact brought untold suffering, slave trade, diseases, colonial oppression. On a brighter, albeit paradoxical note, the same contacts helped the island survive global changes by providing access to new knowledge and opportunities. After the period of destruction and bloody wars that transformed Rapa Nui society, a new cult took hold on the island, temporarily replacing the previous faith in the power of ancestors. Now, the island's fate was decided not by stone statues, but by living people whose endurance, strength, and luck could bring supreme power to them and their clan. Thus began the era of the Birdman, Tangata Manu, the last great cult of Rapa Nui, associated with one of the most exciting and perilous competitions in the island's history. Unlike the Moai era, when power was inherited, the new leader was now determined annually through a competition. Chiefs of leading clans chose their representatives, Hotu, the strongest and most agile warriors. They had to perform a perilous ritual, descend the sheer cliffs of Orongo, swim through turbulent, shark-infested waters to the rocky islet of Motu Nui. There, they had to find the first egg of the sooty tern, Manu, hide it in a special headband, and return as quickly as possible via the same deadly route. The winner presented the egg to his chief. However, the champion himself, who retrieved the egg, did not become the Birdman. This sacred status passed to his chief, who did not directly participate in the competition. The winner himself, having fulfilled his mission, remained in the background, although his clan gained significant influence and respect for the following year. Becoming the Birdman meant not only gaining power, but also completely changing one's life. The new Tangata Manu was considered the living embodiment of the god Make, underwent a purification ceremony, after which his head was shaved and his face painted red and white. He was forbidden to touch the ground, cut his hair or nails. He could no longer participate in the island's daily life and had to spend most of the year in seclusion in a special hut under the supervision of priests. This status was not only honorable, but also extremely risky. The Birdman was surrounded by an aura of sanctity, but at the same time, he became a target for intrigue and assassination attempts. If his clan lost influence or rivals gained strength, a new contender might try to depose him prematurely. Because of this, the Tangata Manu often lived under constant stress, knowing that the power he gained could cost him his life. This ritual was a key event in the island's political and religious life. The winning clan gained control over resources for a year. Its chief received sacred status, and the champion earned the glory of a hero who proved his valor and loyalty to his lineage. The race replaced open warfare and bloody conflicts. Instead of fighting for power, clans competed in strength, endurance, and luck. But even this ritual could not withstand the colossal upheavals of the 19th century. Due to diseases, the slave trade, the disappearance of old traditions, and the activities of European missionaries trying to eradicate pagan rites, the competition ceased, and the ancient beliefs passed down for centuries gradually faded into the past. The transition to the Birdman cult was not accidental. It reflected profound shifts in the worldview of the Rapa Nui, who had experienced social crisis, the collapse of traditional authority, and the destruction of the previous religious system. The stone giants, once symbols of power and ancestral protection, gradually lost their significance. They ceased to be erected and began to be toppled. In the Birdman cult, the Manutara birds, sooty terns, played a key role, considered messengers of the supreme deity, Make. They flew annually to the islet of Motu Nui to nest, and whoever first obtained their egg effectively established a direct link with the god, receiving his blessing and authority for the year. The rejection of the Moai in favor of the bird cult might have been driven by the Rapa Nui losing faith in the power of their ancestors. Perhaps numerous calamities, deforestation, internecine wars, the arrival of foreigners, led them to doubt whether the stone statues could truly protect the island. Birds, in contrast, became a symbol of rebirth and hope as they arrived every spring, bringing new life and the cyclical nature of existence. Connected with the Birdman cult is one of the final parables of Easter Island, the legend of the last Tangata Manu priest who foretold Rapa Nui's fate and mysteriously disappeared. According to tradition, at the twilight of the Birdman era, lived a powerful priest endowed with the gift of foresight. He served at the Orongo sanctuary and sensed great changes were coming. One day, gazing at the sky, he saw an omen, stars that, according to his understanding, should never move, suddenly shifted. He then summoned the elders and delivered a prophecy. Soon, people whiter than sand will appear and bring dark times. The Moai will fall, blood will mix, and the words of the ancestors will be forgotten. The island will become small and the people weak, but our descendants will remember who we are, and the spirit of Rapa Nui will reawaken. After these words, the priest left the village and walked towards Orongo. No one ever saw him again. Some say he threw himself into the ocean and dissolved in the waves. Others claim he turned into a bird and flew west, to return when his people were ready to embrace their ancestral heritage again. This prophecy was passed down orally, and today many Rapa Nui see in it a reflection of real historical events: the island's colonization, the loss of traditions, and the modern revival of Rapa Nui culture. Centuries have passed since the Birdman cult vanished and the last Moai were toppled. The island has endured many trials: colonization, disease, isolation, but the Rapa Nui people have managed to preserve their culture and continue to live on the land of their ancestors. Today, Rapa Nui is a place where ancient traditions coexist with modern realities, and the legacy of the past serves as a foundation for the future. Nowadays, Easter Island is a special territory of Chile, but its inhabitants, descendants of the ancient Polynesians, maintain their unique identity. The island's population numbers several thousand, with about half being indigenous Rapa Nui. Their language, passed down through generations, remains a vital part of the culture, and family customs still echo the ancient past. The main source of income for the islanders has become tourism. Thousands of travelers arrive annually in Rongorongo, the island's only town, to see the majestic statues, visit ancient sanctuaries, and experience the unique energy of the place. Local residents work as guides, create traditional crafts and jewelry, and develop the hotel industry. Thanks to tourism, many crafts are preserved, and ancient legends continue to live on in guides' stories and elders' tales. A special place in island life is held by the Tapati Rapa Nui Festival. This is the largest cultural celebration, held every February. For 2 weeks, the island becomes a hub of competitions, dances, and rituals. Festival participants demonstrate strength, agility, and knowledge of traditions, echoing the feats of their ancestors. The thrilling Haka Pei competition draws crowds. Men race down the slopes of an extinct volcano at high speed, sitting on makeshift sleds made from banana tree trunks. Music, ritual dances, like takona, where the body is used as a canvas for traditional patterns, and stories from elders create an atmosphere where ancient culture comes alive. The island has always involved a search for balance between tradition and modernity. Tourism development opens new economic opportunities, but also carries risks for the fragile ecosystem and unique culture. The connection to ancestors provides strength to preserve heritage, but the question of the future remains a key theme for its inhabitants. They continue to seek a path that allows their culture to thrive in the 21st century without losing its identity. Century after century, the Moai statues have stood on Easter Island, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations, wars, and destructive contacts with the outside world. They have withstood storms, earthquakes, and the relentless passage of time. But today, they face a new threat, one the ancient Rapa Nui never encountered: accelerated deterioration due to modern factors. Research shows that many Moai are threatened by erosion, climate change, and human impact. Although the statues are carved from relatively durable volcanic tuff, centuries of rain, wind, and salty sea spray are steadily eroding their surfaces. Statues located right on the coast are particularly vulnerable. They are exposed to wave action and sea salt, and rising sea levels due to global warming threaten to inundate some of the most famous ahu platforms. The Moai, near Ahu Tongariki, the largest ceremonial platform on the island, featuring 15 restored giants, cause the greatest concern. Researchers note that due to frequent rains and high humidity, their stone surfaces are becoming covered with lichens and micro cracks, which could eventually lead to irreversible damage. Another vulnerable area is the Moai on Anakeena Beach. Here, wind-blown sand and bright sunlight gradually wear away the statue's facial features, and the constant presence of tourists, despite protective measures, accelerates soil erosion around the platforms. The scientific community and island authorities are seeking ways to protect the priceless Moai heritage. Some scientists suggest using special conservation treatments to slow down stone deterioration. Others believe statues in the most critical condition should be moved to protected environments, possibly museums, to preserve them for future generations. However, the Rapa Nui people often hold a different view. For them, the Moai are not just archaeological artifacts. They are living representatives of their ancestors and inseparable from the land they belong to. Moving them from their ahu is tantamount to stripping them of their spiritual power. Among those who continue to safeguard ancient knowledge about the statues, legend tells of a last Rapa Nui master who understands the secrets of working with stone. His name is known only to a few locals, and the Rapa Nui simply call him Kaitu, which can be translated as old stone or stone keeper. He grew up listening to elders' stories about how the Moai were created and inherited knowledge of traditional stoneworking methods. Kaitu, it is said, can identify the origin of each Moai by the hue of its surface, knows which stone tools his ancestors used, and asserts that the secret of the Moai lies not only in their form, but also in their correct placement, in harmony with the land, wind, and sun. When asked if new Moai could be carved today just like the ancient masters did, he reportedly replies, "We can make the stone look similar, but without faith and spirit, it will not become a Moai." The story of Easter Island is a saga of a people who endured incredible trials, survived near extinction, yet preserved their unique culture and spirit. The majestic Moai continue to stand on the land of Rapa Nui, reminders of a great past and prompts for reflection on the future. Today, the Rapa Nui, like their ancestors, seek balance between preserving traditions and facing modern challenges. Their language, rituals, and crafts endure, despite the influence of the globalized world. The statues remain silent guardians of the island, and the people continue to care for their priceless heritage. Rapa Nui is not a lost civilization, but a living, evolving culture. The story of Easter Island is not over. It is being written right now. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time and space. Until next time on our channel.